Hello everyone, my name is JD Sharma and you are watching English, and today we are going to discuss New Historicism. Actually, New Historicism is directly related to Historicism, which is also known as Old Historicism or Historical Criticism. So let us first understand what Old Historicism or Historicism is. So basically, Historicism is an approach or a critical approach to analyze any literary text taking all the conditions, whether social, political, literary or even biographical, that contribute to the making of that text. What they stress is that any literary text cannot be isolated from the conditions, from the circumstances in which it was produced. So we can be able to judge or evaluate or analyze any literary text better if we take all the conditions, the parentage of the author, his attitude, his bent of mind, his political approach, political belief, religious or cultural belief, or the historical events or the cultural events of his time in which it was produced. And only then we can be able to understand fully the literary text, or we can be able to interpret it to the fullest. So New Historicism is all about taking the literary text into all the conditions in which it was produced. In that way, it can be also said that Historicism is directly opposite to the precepts and principles of New Criticism, where they consider the text as an isolated entity, where they don't consider even the biographical details worth considering while they analyze a literary text. For them, literary text is an individual, isolated entity, and as such, it should be evaluated in its own way. We don't have to consider even the biographical details. But as far as historical criticism or historicism is concerned, they have no such things in their mind while evaluating or analyzing any literary text. It is an insistence that all systems of thoughts, all phenomena, all institutions, and all literary text should be situated within historical perspectives. That is to say, literature or literary text must be read within the broader concepts of culture, other discourses ranging from politics, religion, aesthetics to the economic. So literary text or phenomena cannot be somehow torn from history and analyzed in isolation, outside of the historical process. They are determined in both their form and content by their specific historical circumstances, their specific situations in time and place. So basically, a literary text cannot be separated or torn from the historical background, cultural background, or biographical background or conditions in which it was produced. They have something to do with the shaping of that literary text. Actually, this literary text is the reflection of the time, of the whims, of the political and cultural belief of the writer in which it was produced. So, for example, Shakespeare cannot be analyzed taking the conditions of the time of Plato. Shakespeare can be analyzed, evaluated perfectly, interpreted perfectly if we take all the cultural, economical, political, social, religious or even biographical conditions of Elizabethan age. So basically, Shakespeare can be well interpreted or evaluated if we take his biographical conditions, the social, political, economical and religious conditions in which he wrote those plays and his literature. He cannot be placed in all these conditions in the time of Plato. He cannot be evaluated as such. So any literary text or any author can be well interpreted or evaluated if we analyze him or that literary text in all the conditions and the circumstances or the political, religious or economical of the time. Literary text is produced either in support of the state, the governance, or against it. So that piece of literature cannot be detached from the conditions in which it was produced, as it is the reflection of those conditions, and we can be able to identify those power relations which are reflected in the in the literature or literary piece. And why this is so? That according to Hegel and Karl Marx, history of the given phenomenon is held to operate according to certain identifiable laws, which gives a certain predictability and explanatory power. So history of Elizabethan period gave certain laws and laid down certain predictability in which Shakespeare had to do accordingly. He had to comply the laws, the rules of the state. He had to show the power relations in his plays. So he cannot be directly detached from the time of Elizabethan age, in which he became Shakespeare we know today. Moreover, societies and cultures separated in time have different values and beliefs. A historian is not supposed to know the past without giving the context of the literary work. So if we want to understand, evaluate a literary text and we are not given the context in which it was written, we may perhaps not understand, evaluate it as such. For example, if a student of literary criticism has to study a text and the text is given to him removing all the context, literary or biographical, historical, cultural, political, etc., and he is to appreciate the literary world of Homer or the epical world of Homer. He has to appreciate language, bizarre characters, their habits, their cultures, their motives, the themes of Homer. So he cannot be perfect in his evaluation without getting biased and using or imposing his own set of beliefs, using his own conceptions and prejudices of his own time, consciously or unconsciously, even if he does not want to. However objective he wants to remain in the analysis or the evaluation of that text, he inadvertently he may become prejudiced because he is not given any kind of context in which he has to use his literary capacities or critical approach, because all the conditions, the context is removed from the text. So he may perhaps use or impose his own set of beliefs, own set of prejudices of his time, of his age in which he is living. That's why the historicists, they refer or they stress the inclusion of the literary context, social or political context with the literary text if it is to be evaluated. E.M.W. Tilliard's The Elizabethan World Picture and Shakespeare's History plays, that was published in 1944, is the perfect example of this historical criticism. In this book, he describes a set of conservative mental attitudes to society, to the deity, to the created universe, etc., and how they typify the Elizabethan outlook and reflect and are reflected in Shakespeare's plays. Now let us come back to New Historicism. New Historicism as a concept or as a system of thought or as a critical inquiry or critical theory arose in 1980s, and the term was coined by the American critic Stephen Greenblatt, who coined this in his book or in his essay Renaissance Self-Fashioning from Moore to Shakespeare, that was published in 1980s. New Historicism sees literary text not as somehow unique but as a kind of discourse situated within a complex of cultural discourses, religious, political, economic, aesthetic, which both shape it and in their turn are shaped by it. So according to new historicists, a literary text is not something unique, something detached, something separate or something individual, something that should be privileged over other forms of text. Actually, it is a kind of discourse that is situated along with other cultural discourses like religious, political, social, economic. These discourses, they shape literary text and in their turn they are shaped by literary text. So as such, they both kinds of texts are to be studied parallel. This is what new historicists claim. So according to them, history is not restricted or confined to the events and the incidents of the past. For them, history is itself a text, and that text should be studied along with the literary text. Literary text cannot be isolated from these texts. So basically, new historicists claim that literary piece or literary work or literary text does not take place in isolation. It does not take place or take shape in the mind of the author himself. Author is not the progenitor of the literary text alone. Actually, literary text takes shape or gets its shape only in the complex of other texts, which we call history as a text, where everything constitutes a text, whether it is songs, music, brochures, pamphlets, or literary or historical or political, social, religious pamphlets or religious articles, cartoons. They shape the complete nexus of the text in which a literary text gets its shape. Moreover, new historicism or new historicists situate a literary text within power structures and see them participating in conflicts of power between various forms of social and political authority. So new historicists or new historicism, they situate a literary text in the power structures. Actually, it is all about maintaining power, gaining power, how to gain or obtain a power. सारे टेक्स्ट, चाहे वो पॉलिटिकल हो, चाहे वो लिटरेरी हो, सोशल हो, पॉलिटिकल हो, सारे टेक्स्ट में ये कोशिश की जाती है कि किस तरीके से वो पावर जो मेंटेन रहे, वो जो स्टेटस है वो मेंटेन रहे और लोगों के तक वही नैरेटिव्स जाएं जिनसे कि जो पावर मेंटेन की जा सकती है। ये आप नॉर्मल पॉलिटिक्स में इजीली देख सकते हो। जो गवर्नमेंट एग्जिस्टेंस में होती है, पावर में होती है, जो पार्टी पावर में होती है, they contrive all kinds of narratives to be raised in the public so that their status quo is maintained, so that their viewpoint is strongly communicated. चाहे वो मीडिया हो, चाहे वो और तरह का आर्ट हो, कल्चर हो, फिल्म हो, इंडस्ट्री हो, किसी भी तरह का टेक्स्ट जो होता है वो सब लोगों के मन में, लोगों के माइंड में उस इमेज को, उस नैरेटिव को ले जाने का काम करता है जो कि गवर्नमेंट चाहती है, जिससे कि उसका एग्जिस्टेंस जो है वो कंसोलिडेट हो। सो न्यू हिस्टोरिसिस्ट्स they see literary text as the reflection of the intentions and motives of the power. They are studied in the power relation, and so is the other text. The history is not, for new historicists, history is not referred to or confined to, restricted to merely events and incidents. Actually, it is how they are described, how they are narrated. History has also personal viewpoints. The historian, he writes something taking the stance of the politics in consideration. अगर उसको कुछ लिखना भी होता है, whatever he has to narrate, so he has to narrate from the point of view of the government itself. क्या नैरेटिव लोगों तक जानी है, क्या नैरेटिव लोगों तक पहुंचनी है, तो या तो वो हिस्टोरियन पार्टी के अगेंस्ट होगा और या फिर वो फेवर में होगा। और जो ये ऑफिशियल जो सिस्टम्स होते हैं, ऑफिशियल जो अथॉरिटीज होती हैं, ये मोर और लेस दे वर्क अंडर द डोमिनेंस ऑफ द स्टेट, द गवर्नमेंट. In one or other way, they contrive the narrative such a way that the policies of the government are positively narrated to the people. लोगों के मन में वो कोर्सिव तरीके से वो चली जाए, चाहे वो कुछ भी कर रहे हैं, whatever they take, whatever they do, it should be narrated, so narrated that the people feel that it is happening for their own welfare. हमारे अपनी कंट्री का हम एग्जाम्पल अगर लेते हैं, तो जो गवर्नमेंट, एग्जिस्टिंग गवर्नमेंट जो भी कुछ करती है वो इस तरीके से लोगों तक पहुंचाई जाती है, इस तरीके से वो नैरेटिव तैयार की जाती है कि जो मेन अगर कोई इशू चल भी रहा है तो उससे हट कर के वो जो पब्लिक का जो एक ओपिनियन है वो फेवरेबल ओपिनियन गवर्नमेंट के साइड में ही जाए. तो जितनी भी नैरेटिव्स हैं, चाहे वो लिटरेरी हो, नॉन लिटरेरी हो, वो इस तरीके से टेक्स्ट की जाती हैं, इस तरीके से डिवाइस की जाती हैं कि अल्टीमेटली वो जो पावर स्ट्रक्चर है वो मेंटेन हो। इट इज ऑल अबाउट पेट्रियार्की, पावर एंड प्रॉफिट। जहां पे इन तीनों में से किसी भी अगर चीज का कोई कंसिडरेशन नहीं होगा, सो ना तो लिटरेचर, ना ही आर्ट, ना ही कल्चर, ना ही नॉन लिटरेरी आर्टिकल्स, नॉन लिटरेरी थिंग्स, दे कैन कम इन एग्जिस्टेंस। ये सारी चीजें जो हैं वो घूम फिर के रिलेटेड हैं किससे? पावर स्ट्रक्चर से। इसी चीज को, नॉन लिटरेरी टेक्स्ट को और लिटरेरी टेक्स्ट को एक साथ समझने के लिए, एक साथ स्टडी करने के लिए, एक साथ इवेलुएट करने के लिए ही ये थियोरी है न्यू हिस्टोरिसिज्म की। So in simple terms, it is a method based on the parallel reading of literary and non-literary text, usually of the same historical period. The new historicists don't privilege the literary text. Instead of literary foreground, historical background, they see and practice a mode of study in which literary and non-literary texts are given equal weight and constantly inform and interrogate each other. So far literary texts were privileged over non-literary texts. Non-literary texts were considered only as the context in which a literary text was produced. But in the view of new historicists, literary text and non-literary text, they have equal weight, and as such they deserve to be evaluated simultaneously. One thing should be understood in the terms of another. For them, non-literary texts are not the context of literary text. Rather, they are co-text. So the shift has been there in new historicists from context to co-text. Co-text means this is also one of the significant text where it should be evaluated along with the literary text. These non-literary texts are not simply a kind of background, historical background or a cultural background, religious, political background in which certain literary piece is created. Actually, certain literary piece is created along with these texts. These new historicists don't imagine the existence of any kind of text without any motive that is conceived by the power, profit and patriarchy. So in that way, non-literary and literary texts, they are of equal weightage. They are of equal importance because both kinds of texts, they are written taking the advantage or the disadvantage or the profit or the loss of the government. Either they are in the support of the government or they are to uproot, they are to annihilate the existence or to crumble the structure, the foundation of the government. And as such, both are important. The concept of equal weighting was suggested by American critic Louis Montrose, and he also very famously stated that new historicism refers to textuality of history and the historicity of texts. In the same way, Stephen Greenblatt says, new historicism is an intensified willingness to read all the textual traces of the past with the attention conferred only on literary texts. So new historical essays, they place literary text in the frame of non-literary text. Non-literary text work as co-text rather than context. Moreover, they are interested in history as represented and recorded in the documents in history as text. So they are not interested in the events, what happened and when it was happened and how it was happened. They are interested in it, how it was recorded, how it was textualized, how it was scripted. And if it was scripted, they come to the conclusion that it was in some or other way taking the political instance in consideration. They believe that it is all about power that dominates all kinds of scripting, all kinds of texts, whether it is literary or non-literary. Non-literary, they shape literary text, and then literary text, they shape non-literary text. So we cannot detach both kinds of texts from their objective related to the power, the profit and the patriarchy. So what exactly they do when they have to execute their theory, critical theory? They juxtapose a poem or a literary text with a chosen non-literary document, so that a new entity out of the amalgamation of these two, a new identity or entity is formed. After reading literary text in the light of non-literary text, a new kind of text is produced. Secondly, they try to defamiliarize the canonical literary text. They try to defamiliarize the literary text from its so-called famous canon. Literary text is as commonplace as a non-literary text. It is not privileged. And they focus their attention in both text and context on issue of state power and how it is maintained. Patriarchal, colonial, social, political, religious. So the new historicists, they focus their attention on the issues which directly refer to or directly contribute to the state power. And what they generally mean by history as text, actually for them history is subject to changes of culture, gender, perspectives, power relations, etc. rather than as events. In short, texts, whether in history, poetry or autobiography, the cookbook and the courtesy manual, the war memoirs or the surgical text, all are products of particular social condition, share the same prejudices, ideologies, themes and motives. And literary texts are as much part of history and political science and anthropology as texts from these disciplines. So new historicism pay attention to the historical, cultural, political, economical and social contexts of literary text. They assume that literary text and literary themes are reflected, refracted or reinforce the historical contexts. They believe that power is everywhere and the text is a critical site of that power. And the task of the critic is to reveal the workings and the different forms of power from within the text from the past. In the words of Jonathan Dollimore and Alan Sinfield, new historicism is a critical approach that looks at an interaction between state power and cultural forms, and more specifically with those genres and practices where state and culture most visibly merge. So what these two critics mean to say that state power dominates the cultural powers and cultural powers are motivated by the interest of state power and then they shape the workings of state power as well. State power and cultural powers, they are corollary. So that is all for now. Hopefully this video has cleared some of the doubts related to new historicism as a critical theory. We will come back with yet another video. Till then, stay motivated, keep learning, and then like this video, share it among your friends, and if you have not subscribed to this channel so far, please don't forget to subscribe it. Take care. Thank you so much.